everybody. Welcome to Off Panel, a weekly interview podcast about all things comics brought to you by Sketch.com. I'm your host, David Harper, and before we get started, I want to do something a little bit different. I always keep this sort of thing to the outro because I'm an artiste and I don't talk about things like this, but because I recently lost my day job, I just wanted to remind listeners that Off Panel, in fact, has a Patreon at patreon.com/offpanel. So if you enjoy the show, maybe consider backing it on there because, well, it is, in fact, my income right now. But we're not here to talk about that, are we, Si? We're here to talk.
We should dwell on that. It's important.
We're here to talk with a great guest, and we certainly have that, as this week's guest is the writer of comics like The Flash and the upcoming The Voice Said Kill at Image, as well as the Mischief of Magpies at Distillery. It is Si Spurrier. Thanks for coming on, Si.
Thank you for having me again. And I recognize that you are cringing right now when the spotlight has turned upon yourself. But we should take a little moment, shouldn't we, to just celebrate how important and rare it is in our funny little industry that proper journalism with good ethical people is still happening. So, if you're listening to this and you haven't, not just because of recent sadness in David's job life, but just because it's a really good brand to support, do jump on Patreon and do look for Sketched and this podcast in particular. So yeah, I think it's a really important thing to support.
You're not going to make me cry on my own podcast.
I will by the end of this.
It's funny though, because I had this whole beginning of talking about how you're having a very unusual week. And then I was like, I'm having an unusual week. Si, we're having an unusual week.
Yeah.
You did make a post on your site this week about how you are leaving The Flash with the upcoming 25th issue.
I did.
How are you doing? Did it feel good to get that out there? Because it seemed like you were trying to get in front of what might have been some, I don't know, potential speculation by people as to what was going on.
There's a bit of that. Yeah. Yeah. It's funny. I mean, to sort of glance backwards slightly, I recall last time you and I spoke, it was a really good and cathartic interview, but I think it was also right in the midst of a period of almost burnout. And, I know from burnout and I listened to that podcast last week just to sort of remind myself of the format or bits of it. And yeah, I was down in the dumps quite badly at that point. And that's great, because it's important that people recognize that creators go through ups and downs, and it can be extremely hard, and you can be joyous, and you can also be crushed, and you have to sort of navigate a course through all of these things in order to maintain some sort of creative enthusiasm. I mention that now because the primary reason, and there are others and we can talk about them, but the primary reason for my leaving The Flash when I did is because I could tell if I didn't, then I was going to start resenting it. I was going to stop finding it fun. I was going to stop being able to constantly find something that thrilled me and interested me about this IP, and instead would end up doing one of two things. One of them would be to keep going, but tearing my hair out, finding it harder and harder, sticking to my ethical guns and trying to make it as perfect as I could. But that would be an extremely painful experience, because the less instinctive the joy, the less easy it is to latch onto something in a property that makes you immediately thrilled, the harder it becomes. Or even worse, I would just start shitting it out on autopilot, some sort of hack job. And I think with hand on heart, I can say I've never done that. Oddly enough, I find it a little harder to do that than sometimes to do something more thoughtful. And it's a kind of dichotomous challenge for me, because I look at other writers and I see that some of them are extremely good at, there's this phrase, we probably talked about this last time, there's this phrase, playing the hits, which gets used a lot. And I instinctively, my stomach turns at that idea of just doing stuff that people have seen before. It's just not me. And yet I have to recognize that there are plenty of very, very good writers who can come onto a property and find something that is simultaneously familiar but fresh. It's basically playing the hits. You're doing the same sorts of stories that have been done a million times. But frankly, a lot of the readers absolutely love that. And that's kind of what they want sometimes. So, I have to accept that that's not something I'm much good at. I would hate to find myself slipping into some sort of autopilot, even if that were possible. So yeah, it was time. There have been, and again, we talked about this last time we spoke, that the vulnerability of exposing yourself as a creative, capital C creative, another wanky term, but the vulnerability that comes with going and looking for any sort of audience reading, any I mean, I hesitate to use the word participation, but it used to be that in a pre-social media world, you would sit at your desk and you would write, and you would get forwarded letters from the fans by your editor, and they would generally be very glowing, because if you're going to sit down and write a letter, it's because you feel strongly about something. So you'd get 5 very glowing letters and 1 extremely horrible letter if your editor was one of the editors who liked to let those through. These days, that doesn't happen so much. Instead, we've got social media, and um, for all the reasons that we all know, to do with, factions speak louder than herds. The loudest voices are often the most minority voices, and that can be a very positive thing, or it can be a very negative thing, because if you're looking for some sort of reading on how your work is going, yes, you're going to see all of the high praise, but the ones that really hit you are the real shouty people who hate it. And yeah, that just sort of slowly whittled away at me. There were plenty of people who were like, no, the sales are crap. I've gone online and I've looked at the charts and I can tell this book is failing.
Are you talking about the Flash there?
Yeah, simply not the case.
Also, sales charts literally do not exist, so I don't know where these people are looking.
Not in any way that matters. There's a lot of creative naysaying from the people who really did not like my approach. My approach in a nutshell was, come aboard, don't play the hits, do something different, try to make this feel like the sort of property that can support a whole plethora of different genres and tones and timbres. And I stand by that. I think that's a really important, valuable thing to be able to demonstrate for any of these old legacy titles. But there are inevitably going to be fans who did not want that. What they wanted was the Flash running around punching muggers and having the same fights with the same old villains. And I'm not going to roll my eyes. I'm rolling my eyes about that. But it's not up to me to say that's right or wrong. It's just not what I would do. But the people who didn't like my approach were busy all over social media saying it's a failing comic, it's going to get cancelled any day. So yeah, when I made this decision for the right reasons to step away from it, it did feel like a good opportunity to also say, by the way,
Yeah.
before you start spreading the idea that this was a cancellation, not so. And that's quite nice to be able to end a book on your own terms. Generally speaking, when you come off a big 2 book, it is because the numbers have slipped below a particular threshold. You get a very polite little tap on the shoulder from the editor. And I was kind of expecting that at any moment. That is not what happened, and I thought it was worth saying so.
Yeah. I have 2 things I want to talk about in there, and I think that they are like wildly disparate things. One thing is, I do want to note, I might have emailed you about this when it was happening, but after you appeared last time, I got a number of people who reached out to me specifically to say that they really appreciated hearing your perspective, because it opened their eyes to kind of the impact that like those types of, I mean, it's like abstractly we just should understand the fact that like our words have power, and that like by saying things that we can affect people and stuff like that. But a number of people reached out and specifically said how much they appreciated hearing from a creator who was honest about how that stuff affects them and all that. And so I think it was really good that you were honest about that, because I think a lot of times we just kind of keep these things locked in and we don't realize. I might be speaking about myself right now too, which is kind of funny.
But fine.
but I think it was good that you did that. The other thing is, I think that the horse race part of comics, where you're talking about sales equaling quality, and I think this is true for everything, I think it's terrible. And I think that for a while I contributed to that, and I regret contributing to that, because there's all these like YouTube channels that will say matter-of-factly that the quality of a comic is determined by how much it sells. And most of the time, no offense to the places that are running this, they're working off of data that comes from a very small selection of comic shops that is not reflective of the overall sales. And so they're speaking with confidence about something that's based off of flawed data. And so I just find the whole thing, I mean, the fact that you have to, like, anyone has to go through this where they're like, well, this comic's not selling, so it's bad. I'm like, that statement is not true. None of that statement is true. It's a fascinating time to live, isn't it, Si?
It's bonkers, and it's so lonely, without playing my tiny, tiny violin. Like my recollection of working with Marvel, and this may have changed, but during the whole of the Krakoa era, a lot of the creators were quite frustrated because we had no access to any sales data, let alone a sort of general notion of how well a book was doing. The editors didn't always get access to the data. It was only the senior editors and above. And so we'd get these vague notions. Oh, this one's doing quite well. This one's not doing as well as we hoped. When that pisses me off, and naming no names, this is true of every publisher who does work for hire, is when the shit sticks to the creative team when a book does not exceed its expectations. Right. If you're putting out, you've just commissioned a new mini-series about an E-list character, and you've got a plucky writer and an amazing new artist, and they're going to give it their all because this is their big moment. And they recognize that this is a character nobody gives a fuck about, but here we are. This is our big moment. We're going to be as creative as we possibly can. And then the numbers come back and they're disappointing. And the editors say to those creators, yeah, I'm really sorry, guys. This one's going to stick a little bit. It'll be a little while before we're able to hire you again. Now, I know that happens. That's happened to at least 3 of my friends. And that just blows my mind because it's not the creator's job to guess how well a book is going to do. That's the fucking editor's job and the marketing people's job. And if they're holding it against creators when a book that was doomed before it came out of the gate is in fact not performing very well, that's not the creator's fault. They could have done a wonderful job, and they frequently do. Some of the very best books do not sell at all, and that's comics. That's the weird culture we've got where publishers have to keep doing the same thing. Retailers have to avoid risk by putting all of their effort and time and money into the same shit we've seen a million times. What it means is that the most daring, exciting, creative, important, valuable, emotionally charming books are the ones that nobody is prepared to take a risk with, and therefore they don't appear on the shelves. They just disappear into obscurity. That's fucked. It's completely fucked.
This is where I'm going to turn it to compliment you. That's what I really appreciate about you. And I know that this might come as, after what you said, might come as a I don't know, double-edged compliment, but you seem like you know yourself. You seem like you really know what you want to do and you know who you want to be as a writer. And like you lead in that direction, and like it's like you have like a personal code of ethics in your own writing skills and your own aims and everything like that. And like I've talked a lot on the podcast, a lot lately actually, about how like the best work tends to be the ones that are willing to make people uncomfortable. Because if you said playing the hits, like a lot of it comes down to superhero readers want the same flavors, or they think that they want the same flavors again.
That's a very important distinction. I was going to say there's a difference between what they think they want and what they actually need. But yeah, carry on.
But if you look through comic history, all of the most successful and memorable superhero books are the ones that push people to do something more and push people to want something more. And like, this is where the double-edged compliment comes in. I'm not saying you're 100% successful, Si, but you 100% try, and I appreciate the hell out of that.
Thank you. It's very nice to hear it put like that. I think to be painfully candid, there is an element of protesting too much. I think over the course of my career, whereas I began from a slightly arrogant position of thinking, I can do anything and I can do anything well. And if what these crazy Americans want is big decompressed comics about steroidal people hitting each other, I can do that better than anybody. And then over the course of my career, I've realized actually, I'm not very good at that. I try very hard to be good at that. I try very hard to do what it sounds so fucking arrogant of me to say, but it's dumb. and I cannot do the dumb in a way that frustrates me. I feel like it
Sure.
should be easy. Why can't I do dumb? It should be so fucking easy to do 20 pages of two people hitting each other. But it just doesn't work. I'm very, very bad at it. It's a lot harder for me to do dumb than it is for me to do the peculiar, weird, contrary, stupid stuff that I end up doing. So I think over the course of my career, rather than being annoyed about that and being sad about that and being frustrated about that, I've just persuaded myself that, you know what? Do what you're good at and don't try and do what you're not good at. And that's evolution, isn't it? That's like a way of saying, well, listen, this matters. I don't really have the opportunity to do the opposite, and that's fine. I just have to be okay with the fact that the thing I'm okay at represents slightly unnerving vibes, slightly cerebral mentality, all of these things that, like 1990s Vertigo vibes, which is exactly what I grew up with. I don't think it's any great surprise that that's where I've ended up. But yeah, it is occasionally when I stop to think about it, and I think I've bored you with this before, this notion that if you're truly ambitious in this industry, if what matters to you is success and profile raising and frankly money, then you have to be quite good at doing what people want, and what they want, which I don't believe is what they really need, but what they want are those big, beat heavy, quite decompressed books in which nothing very surprising happens, nothing very challenging happens, and that's okay. It's comforting, familiar, high octane, slightly morally simplistic psychodrama, which, that's okay. It's not for me, and as I say, I'm very poor at writing a stupid version of that. But there's places where I can scuttle around the edges of that where I don't look too out of place. And that's my career.
I do think it's funny that you say all that, but like, we were talking about the Flash and talking about how like people were talking about its perceived lack of success and stuff like that. When you came on the podcast last, you didn't say it, but I'm like 100% certain you were implying that that book was supposed to last 12 issues. Like that was designed to. You're on it for 25. If the book wasn't a success, you wouldn't have been on there for 25. You would have been on there for 12. You actually probably would have been on there for 6. I'm curious as to, you talked about how you reached the point where you realized that you were it was getting too hard. It was, you couldn't, I forgot how you phrased it in your write-up. Like you couldn't pull back that string or however you phrased it. When did you realize that you needed to move on?
It's probably just after. Well, there's a longer answer. I'll tell you what. I'll start. So there's an oft repeated phrase about the difference between like create your own comics and work for hire comics. And if you're about to sit down and write something that you've created yourself and you own it, you already love it. It's already something that sits in your heart rent free. So your job is to persuade everybody else to love something that they've never heard of before, to find the thing about it that they're going to love. That's a challenge. If you're doing work for hire involving a property character, franchise character in some shared universe, then it's the exact opposite. Everybody who is a fan of this character already has it in their heart, already loves it. The challenge is to make yourself find something about it that allows you to feel the same way. Now, that's usually not that hard because in some cases, creators have grown up as fans anyway, so they've already got these kind of bucket list characters. That's not entirely true of me. I didn't grow up with Marvel and DC. I grew up with, sort of British comics and then discovered this stuff a little bit later in life, went through Vertigo and eventually found my way to a lot of the best superhero comics. But, it's not like I spent my entire teens reading The Flash or the X-Men or any of these things that I've tipped my hat at along the way. So that's an interesting paradigm to have to sort of square. Yeah, the problem then becomes, here I am, I'm finding the thing about this property that makes me feel thrilled, makes me feel passionate. I've been asked to pitch something so by default, the first 6 or 12 issues that are in my pitch are something that I've spent a long time thinking about, spent a lot of time daydreaming and putting things together and outlining it all. And then at some point, the thing you pitched starts to come to an end and the horizon is empty. Now, various things can happen at that point. You can either, as I did, expect somebody's going to go, well done, you've done a really interesting, unusual, novel take on this character. Now it's time for you to move on to do something similar with a different character. That's generally how my career has gone. I get brought in to do something a bit unusual with a character that needs a bit of a spruce up. What actually happened in this case was they went, great, what's next? The expectation was to keep going. Now, that wasn't too bad because I had some ideas, and I always have ideas just in case things go well. And when I had pitched for the first 12 issues, I had, as part of the pitch, said, listen, and if we carry on, then we could go in this direction, we could go in that direction. So that was fine. But that becomes more challenging every time you do it because it's not part of the thing that initially drew you to the character, that initially drew you to the pitch that you succeeded with in the first place. And as I said in the beginning of this chat, the challenge of finding something new about this IP every time, whereas if it's the right character at the right, if it was Hellblazer, then I would never run out of that thrill because that's just something that speaks to me on such an instinctive, deep level. With other characters like the Flash, it becomes a little bit harder to find something new to say each time. The other thing that happens is I have to be very guarded about how I talk about this. One has an eye on the broader shared universe. And part of the game with all of these projects, part of the skill and part of the resilience, part of the flexibility is being able to play your part in a far broader drama. So like last time you and I chatted, we talked about Sins of Sinister and all of that stuff in the X Office, and the way that if you can approach it in a particular way, if you'll find yourself a small cog in a very big machine, if there's a summer event or there's big machinations going on that change the way the entire shared universe is moving and changing and evolving, if you can do it in such a way that feels fun, and with Sins of Sinister it absolutely was, because we identified a hole and we set ourselves this challenge of creatively turning the bug into a feature, that's fine. If instead you feel as though your plans are either ancillary to, or in some cases anathema to, these big nebulous shifting pieces that you have no control over, then that gets in the way a little bit of one's creative enthusiasm. And I'm not saying that's exactly what happened. I'm saying that those tensions are all there. They're all part of the picture. And every time you sit down to plan a new arc, not only are you therefore thinking to yourself, right, well, what's a thing about this character and the cast of supporting characters? What's a controlling idea that I think is true so that I can write it and feel proud of it? But also, how can I do that in such a way that it doesn't fuck up the bigger picture? It doesn't go against the stuff that they've asked me to avoid. It doesn't fuck up the stuff that they've asked me to lean into. I'm not allowed to use that character. I have to use that character. I know that at the end of this arc, I need these people to be over here, but unfortunately, I can't have that guy over there, which means I can't do that. All these secondary calculations that you have to sort of apply. Generally, it's fine. I've been quite successful at that, and like one of the nice things that my editor on The Flash was always very complimentary about is that I'm quite a good team player. I'm quite good at rolling with those punches and supporting the big picture and making things feel additive rather than getting grumpy and trying to ghettoize my own story. But yeah, eventually it just got to the point that I sort of thought this is feeling like more of a challenge than it should. And I feel that in order to be truly proud of what I do, in order to feel like it's something that I believe in, I shouldn't be spending so long figuring out what works. It should just be flowing out of me, and it wasn't so much anymore.
And now, a quick word from one of our sponsors. Love sci-fi, horror, fantasy, and action? Then 2000 AD is the greatest comic you're not reading. 2000 AD has a whole universe of characters from Judge Dredd and Strontium Dog through to Rogue Trooper, Zenith, Shakara, and many more. In every weekly issue, you get 5 action-packed stories from incredible creators including Garth Ennis, Rob Williams, Alex DeCampi, and Dan Abnett. Get a print subscription and it'll arrive at your door every week, and your first issue is free. Or subscribe digitally, get free back issues, and download DRM free copies of each issue for just $9 a month. That's 128 pages of incredible comics every month for less than $10. And all subscribers get amazing offers like money off vouchers and exclusive products. Head to 2000AD.com and click on subscribe now, or download the 2000AD app and start reading today. And now, back to the show. You mentioned him. I want to bring him up. I wanted to give a shout out to Chris Rosa, your editor on The Flash at DC. I met Chris at New York Comic Con 2023. He stopped by. I had taken over Declan Shalvey's table to sell a zine that I made. And he stopped by just to buy it, meet me. And he is a hell of a nice guy, and he loves you. I think I might have mentioned this last time. I don't even remember, but it's been a while. But either way, I do want to emphasize the fact that, like, it probably helps navigate those things when you have somebody like Chris that believes in you and believes in what you can bring to the book.
It really does. I mean, there is no gig that I have had in a work for hire space that hasn't come about as a consequence of somebody else reaching out to me. Mm-hmm. You know, we spend our time as creators going, oh, I've got this great idea for a Lobo comic, or God, one day I'm going to get a chance to write that Wolverine comic. Actually, in practice, pitching stuff blind almost never comes off. What happens is you got to know somebody 5 years ago because they were at that time a sub-editor at another publisher, or you were both burnt out in the back of a bar because you couldn't face schmoozing anymore, and you got chatting because you were both socially awkward at a convention, whatever it may be. Generally speaking, if you're nice to people, because people are interesting and generally speaking quite nice, and if you avoid the pricks, and there's plenty of those, sadly, in our industry, then eventually nice things happen. You can't program it, you can't expect it, you can't set your time by it. But yeah, Chris liked my work when he was at Boom. He's a lovely, lovely bloke. He got the opportunity to find a new writer for The Flash, and I'm sure he asked loads of people, but one of them was me. And, you know, I swung big on it because frankly, I didn't need the work. I thought if I'm going to write this character that seems like such a strange fit for me, then I'm going to find something about them that I will love. So I swung hard. Cosmic horror seems obvious to me, and Chris loved it, and that's the pitch that won. So, yeah, I'm a big advocate. Like, people, there's that old question about, you know, what's the best advice for people in comics. And all the hokey answers are exactly right. You know, read everything, write everything, da 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 da. But the best advice I can give is just be among people. And if it can't be real people because you're awkward like me, then let it be online people. Whatever it is, create networks. Not because you're calculating and manipulative, but because people are very, very interesting and very supportive. And you never know where that gig's going to come from. It might be because you got chatting to an artist 6 years ago, and that artist's roommate turns out to be an editor, and the name trickles down the system, and before you know it, somebody's offered you a job. But in the meantime, even if that never happens, you've got this incredible network of people to support you, and that's worth it in its own right.
Absolutely. I just want to make one more comment about The Flash before we go on. I love the fact that you were talking about how, like, you had some ideas in case it worked out, basically. Some people have, like, break glass in case of emergency ideas. You have break glass in case of no emergency ideas.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's either a great virtue or a real problem. Like, people will often say I squeeze too many ideas into each story, but I sort of think I'd rather do that than the alternative. Yeah, I have spreadsheets, dozens of pages long of ideas that will probably never get seen. I remember having a lovely late night, slightly drunken chat with an exceptionally successful comic book writer of my acquaintance, whose name I shall not mention. And he was really worried because he was like, I've got 4 more ideas in me. That's it. After that, I'm done.
Capped out.
Yeah.
Well, you mentioned this earlier. Before we talk about your other projects, I did want to talk about the last time you were on. You were definitely sorting through some things about what you wanted for yourself in your career, and also just where you were. Like, you were coming off your work on Krakoa, on the X-Men. You were getting close to wrapping Damn Them All, and you were just coming on to The Flash.
Mm-hmm.
You didn't really talk about this. How are you doing these days? Are you feeling better? Are you feeling like you're in a better place?
That's really sweet of you to ask. Yes, I think so. It was definitely mid bummer phase, and I think probably just because overwrought, working too many hours, not sleeping well enough. My kids were a little younger a couple of years ago, which makes all the difference. So
Not enough
uh,
beach time?
not enough. And now I'm spending a lot of time on the beach. We're very lucky to live right next to the beach, so that makes a huge difference. No, I think it's always a question of balance, and it's a question of, like we were talking before about nosce te ipsum, know yourself. If you're not good at something, don't beat yourself up. Just focus on what you are good at. The same is true of working practices. If, as I recognize now, I cannot keep working as hard as I have at certain times of my life without it being deleterious, not only to my life and my relationships and my mental health, but also to the work itself, then it's fucking stupid trying to do that. You have to say, you know what? My brain is a muscle. If you keep overusing it, it's going to sprain. Something's going to go wrong. And that's my livelihood out the window. And also my vocation and the thing that I'm most proud of. So it is common sense and survival to say, you know what? Slow down. Have I been successful in slowing down? Probably. I give myself now, at crunch phases of my career, I have tried to do a work for hire comic in about 3 or 4 days. Now I give myself something like 7 days to do a comic, and if I'm quicker than that, then great. I can go and make some notes in notebook, think about writing that novel that I'll almost certainly never get around to. Start work on a screenplay that I'll probably never finish, and that's fine. That's all just process. That's all just sort of letting your brain toy with the things that it wants to toy with before going back to the next book on the slate. I do sometimes still, resent is the wrong word, but struggle with the relentlessness of periodical publishing. I chat to, so Garth Ennis and I are very, very tight friends, and like he's at a wonderful point in his career where he's able to just say, right, well, I'm doing a 6 or 7 issue mini, and I'm going to write them in order. I'm not going to write anything else at the same time. I'm just going to sit down and do it. And that's joyous. That's a nice feeling when that happens. It's far more often that one is changing gears every week. Do this week, do that next week, do this third thing the week after that. And I think that used to be something I could do with my eyes shut. I think that gets a little bit harder the older you get, if only because you want every book to be the best book. People ask me, what's the thing you're proudest of? And it's always the next one that I haven't released yet. So yeah, I think I'm doing better. I think I'm just sort of getting to know myself constantly a bit better and recognizing that there are things I can no longer do, things I don't want to do because they're horrible and they make me not a very nice person. And there's a sort of quality of life that I feel I deserve, that being a slave to this treadmill takes away from me. And I sort of, yeah, I wish that it were possible to be visible and successful in US and UK comic book spheres without it meaning that you're working on 6 books at once.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, that would appear to be the primary way of climbing to the top of this pile, is being able to smash out a superhero book in 3 days and then move on to the next one, so that there's just a constant presence on the shelves. And that's amazing to me. Like, those people who can do that, and there's plenty of them, it feels like a superhuman feat to me. But yeah, I have to embrace the things that I can do. That's not one of them.
I mean, there's a part of me, And I'm sure that there's probably listeners who are thinking this is just like, why don't you write a graphic novel? Why don't you approach it that way? But the tricky thing about it is, and like you're touching on it, there's two things that are important about the periodical, the single issue, the comic format, in the way that it's structured and the way that it is valued in the market is two things. One, it's like an advertisement for you saying, I'm a writer of value. You should hire me for things. But also, knocking those scripts out means you're getting paid. And so trying to keep that wheel turning and trying to keep scripts going out means that you can put food on the table, means that you can spend a day on the beach and be a little bit less worried about it, things like that. And so as easy as it is for me to say, Si, why don't you write a graphic novel? It's not as easy as that, is it?
It's not. Everything you've said is absolutely true. The minutiae of how long it takes to get paid can be the difference between life or death for an awful lot of creators. The 30-day standard, 45-day in some places. A new publisher just set up, and one of the best things about it is that they will pay you within 9 days. And that shouldn't be
9 days?
Yeah, but that's astonishingly important. So things like that matter. There are also some weird logistical things. Like, it's not as easy as it might sound to just find somewhere to publish a graphic novel. Traditional psychology for the comic book industry prevails, in which if you are going to write something that's 100 pages long, you might as well put out 5 floppies first, double dip, try and make some money back from the monthlies. And I think that mentality is no longer entirely foolproof, but it's still there.
I think it's held on longer than it's been entirely true.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's fair. I sort of keep waiting for there to be some gradual shift in the bricks and mortar comic store realm to something a little bit more like what you see in Europe, the sort of bande dessinée model, which is where
The albums.
Yeah, in which a 30-page, 38-page album retails for 15 to 18 euros, which is $15 to $20. And people will queue around the block for that. And they come out once every 6 months. But it's such a dense nugget of story, and it's so lavishly drawn and painted that it's worth waiting for. There isn't the same psychology of disposability. There isn't the same sort of shrug. This was a fun comic. I just dropped $5 on something that took me 2 minutes to read. It was fine. I'll probably buy the next one. That's just completely the wrong mentality as far as I'm concerned. So I don't know. I don't have the answers. I don't want to put retailers out of business because they're heroes. I do think they've been very badly served by the shifting tides of the industry and the distribution network in particular, and it's ended up in a place where make one mistake and you're out of business. The simplest thing to do is to be completely risk averse. The easiest way to be risk averse is to only put your money and time and energy into things that feel familiar to you and to the readers. I mentioned this before. So it's very difficult to get anything out that feels new or interesting. There are some what we sort of euphemistically call proper publishers who are moving into graphic novels, and they've got money to spend, but I don't think they do very well in the marketplace. It's the sort of industry where you get 1 or 2 books that do so stratospherically well that everything else becomes a loss leader. It's something I haven't really explored very much. Certainly I have ideas that I'd like to do with graphic novels, but most of the publishers with whom I work and the editors I like working with take the view that you might as well dip into the monthly market too. I think that's going to change. I think I look at, Brubaker and Phillips and their amazing success increasingly doing standalone books rather than trying to double dip into the monthly market as well. I think the tide is slowly changing. It won't be for every book, but I think you end up with a sort of this is fun, predominantly superhero-y art stories which cleave to the periodical notion, and then over here you have slightly more highbrow, arch your eyebrow, sophisticated books, which are probably a little more album-esque or trade-esque. But that's probably just the sort of 1990s Vertigo reader in me talking, because I discovered comics reading graphic novels by Alan Moore and Garth Ennis and God help me, Neil Gaiman. so it's I don't have answers. I just know that it's not working the way it is right now.
I'll be really interested to see. I mean, obviously, this is like a top tier creator, but I'll be interested to see how Brian K. Vaughan and Nico Henriksen's Spectators does, because, I mean, granted, that was funded by the Substack grant that they got, but it is a very atypical book for the traditional direct market. Even if it is a graphic novel, I think it'll do well in the book market and everything. But it's also just like, it's a big graphic novel from a couple people who are not really known in America for big graphic novels, even if, they literally did Pride of Baghdad together.
Sure. But their names are known. I mean, that's I think the point. If you're a retailer, if you're going to put your money behind something, it's because we recognize, looking at our databases, that these two names equal money. So put some money behind these two names.
That's them playing the hits.
Yeah, in a way, it's and that's, if it's not Superman or Batman, then it's the names of creators, and I would far rather it was that than the former. But it does mean that if you're just trying to break into comics, and what you have the best solid gold graphic novel idea in the world, and your artist is astonishing, and then you too, nobody's going to stock your book.
Yeah. I know this is an impossibility. Well, probably an impossibility. I don't really know how it works. I know it works for artists, but I've never really seen a writer do this. I feel like you would do really well in the French comic scene. Like, your style and like the way that you approach story. It's funny, the last 2 years, I do it every year. My end of the year podcast is with my favorite or the person who made my favorite comic. While I didn't get the number one person this last year, the last 2 years, that episode has been with a French cartoonist. And it is interesting to read those graphic novels and those stories when they get translated into English, and to just see like it's not just about the format, it's also about what like those creators are allowed to do within the format. There's a completely different value system in how they're able to tell stories. And like, maybe you're secretly French. Maybe your vibe is very bande dessinée.
I'm giving a knowing little smile, because the thing I am working on this week, which I cannot talk about at all, is in fact fated to be French first before it's English. So
look at you.
Yeah, and it's quite you'll know what I'm talking about when it appears, because it's quite a big deal for me, and I wish I could even name the artist, because the artist is somebody who is thrilling. So it's it's your line of thought is exceptional. It hasn't gone unnoticed that a lot of the books I'm most proud of, and I'm thinking of stuff with Matthias like Coda, and stuff with Jeff like The Spire, do very well overseas, particularly in Europe. It's just I think it's instructive and valuable for American and British readers, especially those who are of a sort of curious, experimental bent, who may love superheroes but recognize that doesn't have to be everything. It is valuable to take a little look at the bestsellers in other parts of the world and recognize that it's really just by a quirk of history that this one peculiar little subgenre has become so preeminent and so dominant. It could have been anything. It could have been pirates or Vikings or spaceships, whatever, you name it. It could be some funny little subgenre that becomes completely dominant. And that's sort of what's happened in France. They love historical fiction and fantasy and dinosaurs and pirates. And in Japan, I mean, don't even start. There's
everything.
So many interesting.
Everything.
But right, but that's sort of the point. It's weird, and I'm sure many papers have been written on why it should be that the American psyche has latched on so tightly to the archetype of the costumed do-gooder. I have thoughts on that, but this isn't really the time for that. But yeah, you're right. If you find yourself at odds with a culture, creative culture, or at least at odds is wrong. If you find yourself slightly awkward, an awkward fit for a culture, then luckily there are others.
That is true. Well, let's talk about one of your other projects you have coming up. It's actually launching the week that this podcast goes up. It is The Voice Said Kill, your new Image Comics series, miniseries with artist Vanesa Del Rey, colorist John Starr, letterer Hassan Otsman-Elhau, designer Emma Price, and editor Eric Harber. And here's a solicit. The wet heat of the Louisiana bayou. Alligator poachers prowl the mud bug mire. A park ranger, heavily pregnant, raises a hateful mug of moonshine with a criminal matriarch. Great scene, by the way. And one deadly son of a bitch, out of his mind on shrooms and retribution, loads his rifle for the human hunt and screams down the stars. I've read the first issue. It's great, and it is undoubtedly the best, I quote, sweaty swamp thriller or fever dream Cajun crime comic I've ever read. I do have to say, though, I never would have expected like an extremely bayou set comic from an extremely British gentleman like yourself. What made you want to tell a crime story set in the bayou like this?
It had to be there.
Yeah.
It's it's a weird. So I had spent a bit of time in the bayou, and before that, I had spent a bit of time in the Bolivian rainforest, and those impressions, those sort of sensory readings, were clearly bubbling away in the back of my mind. The Voice Said Kill is, I think it's the second time that I have ever received a complete story as an idea in my mind, including every element of the plot, the preoccupations of controlling idea and theme and ethical concerns, all of that stuff, the character, the whole scene's just played out, and it almost never happens. Generally, an idea sort of builds itself in a piecemeal kind of way. It's almost, as a consequence of that, it's almost impossible to deconstruct and unpack. What I can say is that a lot of so to take two steps back, it's the story of a very heavily pregnant Louisiana wildlife park ranger in the bayou, and she is working alone because all of her teammates have gone home with food poisoning, and she should have a nice easy day of low effort work, but instead everything goes wrong. A whole ton of shit goes wrong, and she ends up, despite her pregnancy and despite her deep concerns, moral concerns about her role and her responsibility, she ends up tangling with a kind of rogues gallery of alligator poachers and drug runners, and just sort of fascinating swampy characters. That being the case, and her pregnancy and impending motherhood being such an important part of it, a lot of the sort of thematic oversight was to do with one's role in the world, one's responsibility to the world, one's place in this sort of perfect, beautiful, but very frightening ecosystem, this garden we live in. It was utterly imperative that the story take place somewhere where civilization and wilderness sit side by side. And without getting too wanky about this, because I'm sure I've bored you with this before, I'm sure that this was part of the whole Hellblazer journey that we went on. Part of the quintessentially white American psyche speaks to the myth of one person versus nature. There is no wild that I can't tame. So it was necessary that our central character not be a white American. They had to be somebody who came from a position of otherness, somebody who came from a position of poverty, somebody who understood intrinsically the relationship between the wilderness and civilization in a way that all of these other assholes who come blundering into our story waving guns and attitudes cannot understand. The point being, when all of this stuff kind of hits you in the face, you just spend a little while exploring down each line and you realize that actually most of these decisions have been made for you. If it hadn't been in the bayou, I didn't know where it could be, because that just fits perfectly. And once you sort of find the thing and you start to imagine the character, other bits open up. I recognize that there's this whole exciting world of alligator ranching and alligator poaching that very few people know much about, which gives us some of the plot framework that we need over here. And over here, there's a whole thing about Cuban drug submarines that nobody really knows much about, and that gives us some of this stuff over here. And da 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 da. It just makes itself known. The challenge then becomes, how do I take all these bits that need to be there and make them feel honest and lived in? And that was just a process of a huge amount of research and lots of talking to people, lots of relying on friends, lots of relying on Vanesa, who has spent a lot of time, more time than me, in the places that we tell our story. So yeah, just sort of trying very hard to be honest about something that never really felt like a choice in the first place.
Yeah. I just want to say I actually know a lot about Cuban drug submarines, so I guess I have a head start.
Good.
What was the other book that you came fully formed into your head?
It was a book called Number Cruncher, which I wrote many, many years ago with an artist called PJ Holden. And it's almost impossible to describe time traveling story about a guy who manages to hack the resurrection protocol so that he can keep being reborn within the lifetime of the woman he loves, and accidentally therefore fucks up her life, all told from the point of view of the sort of metaphysical thug who gets sent by God to stop this from happening. It's an absolute headfuck. It's a lot of fun, but it's the sort of story that, because it's so self-referential, like all good time travel stories, it really could only have occurred as one fully formed crystalline structure rather than something that put itself together bit by bit. But it's super rare for me to have a whole fully clothed idea like that.
I imagine that's rare for most. And now, a quick word from one of our sponsors. This July, one of the greatest creator-owned comic series of all time begins a powerful new chapter. From Oni Press, return to the Eisner Award-nominated world of The Six Gun as creators Cullen Bunn and Brian Hurt reunite for The Six Gun, Battle for the Six #1, an extra-sized comic event told across 3 prestige format issues. In the aftermath of the Civil War, a race to claim 6 objects of enormous occult power began, thrusting the fate of humanity into the hands of an ordinary young woman and a hard-nosed gunfighter. Together, they were our best hope to stop Armageddon. They prevailed, but at a terrible price. 3 decades later, at the dawn of the 20th century, the Six Gun is about to be reborn anew, as it has been countless times across the centuries. The Six Gun Battle for the Six #1, coming to comic shops everywhere on July 23rd. And now, back to the show. One of the things that really stood out about the first issue is, and maybe this is partially Vanesa. Vanesa Del Rey, who I just want to say I love seeing on this book, has experience in the swamp with Jordi Belair on Redlands. So it was a great fit for this. But this book is incredibly atmospheric. I almost feel like I can feel the humidity as I'm like reading the book. When you're writing, like, how much of what you do once you get everything squared away is about atmosphere and vibe as much as it is about plot? Like, is that something you think about, or is it more focused on telling the story? Where are you at? Because it feels like atmosphere.
It's a great question. The truth is, when I wrote this, I gave the atmosphere an amount of thought. When Vanesa came aboard, which was sometime later, it became a transformative, if not defining, point of the whole book. what I mean by that is it's a crime thriller, right? It's swampy, psychedelic crime. It's got echoes of Fargo. It's got echoes of True Detective. There's a whole sort of funny Apocalypse Now vibe in the central sections when there's like a walk out into the heart of darkness and a return journey. All of that could have been drawn by a very conventional artist with a very straightforward button down style, and it would have been fine. It would have done quite well. I would have been proud of it because it was the story that I wanted to tell. It would have, I suspect, felt a little bit like a pitch for a Hollywood movie, but fine. Plenty of those on the shelves. Nothing wrong with that. But then the opportunity came around to work with Vanessa, and it becomes a transcendental experience. It becomes the purest that I have seen, anyway, the purest expression of the comic book medium's magical ability to fuck about with synesthesia, to mess with the reader's mind to an extent that in the right hands, the reader's reactions, the reader's responses to a location and to a vibe can be manipulated quite effectively. I've taken to describing some of Vanessa's art as impressionistic because I recognize that a casual flicker through of the comic is going to look at some pages and think, oh, that's very sketchy. This doesn't feel very rendered. But if you pause for a moment and look, she's able to, with a squiggle, characterize exactly the right expression or exactly the right moment of levity between two people. And if there's nothing much occurring, if what's happening in this scene is quite sedentary, things break apart, things become quite loose. But then as soon as things get more tense, and especially when we start to spend more time in the forest, when we leave this illusion of civilization and start to venture out into this untamed and untamable space, the detail crowds in such a way in concert with John's colors that you mentioned it yourself, you can feel it. You can smell the swamp. You can hear the insects in the grass, and you can feel the Spanish moss floating in the tree. It's just the most magical transportation I've ever seen in comics, all conducted through the style of the art. And it doesn't hurt that we've got Hass on letters because he does the same magic with his lettering. It's so unusual and so additive to what could have been a perfectly good but quite conventional crime thriller. Yeah, I could not be more proud of it. We come back to the conversation we were having before about anything that's a bit new and unfamiliar. How do you persuade people to take a punt on it? Because if I had just got, Johnny McBoring to draw it, then retailers probably would have looked at the previews and gone, "Oh, I recognize what I've got here. Yeah, this is a crime comic." Instead, we have to work very hard to persuade people that there is not only room in comics, but there is a critical need in comics for more artifacts of this type that say, you know what, fuck the conventional way of doing things. Just look what comics can do when we muck about a bit, when we experiment, when we allow ourselves to be a little bit transported by something unconventional. Anyway, I'm clearly very in love with my own project, and that's probably not a bad thing, but it's a little ungainly, so I'll shut up. But I'm super proud of it.
I will say I did love Johnny McBoring's run on Iron Man, so I understand why retailers would be about that. But
run?
I did want to shout out. There's one scene. It's funny. I'm going to pick the one that doesn't actually take place in the swamp and the forest and everything like that. There's a scene that features the lead character, Sergeant Marie Burgow, and Mrs. Waters, who is a crime boss, who is the most terrifying and imposing character in the history of fiction, who is exclusively seen in an RV. The way that Vanessa draws that scene, there's this one shot, this one panel where I'm going to show you this, and no one else can see it, where she's like sitting in this like comfortable, but yet I am so comfortable because I know I could have you killed in like 1 second type vibe. Yeah, exactly. That scene.
I just got my comps today, so I'm holding up.
That scene is like, it is just like I don't know, a mission statement for vibe.
Yeah.
And like it sets up the entire book in a really, really effective way. And I don't know, I think it's like there's a lot of stuff in here that is like kind of the magic of comics where you see, you mentioned it, it's like, would it have been as atmospheric if you had a different artist? Probably not. But once you knew who you were working with, it shapes the book and it becomes something different and better and more. And now I'm just complimenting your work too.
No, I mean, it's not even mine. It's Vanessa's, and she deserves so much praise. And also, it's the medium. We operate. This is another reason why I get a little bit fed up about writers with massive egos, because it is a collaborative medium, and if the best writer works with the worst artist, nobody gives a fuck. If the worst writer works with the best artist, people will read it and love it because it looks so beautiful. So let's not go anywhere down the whole which is more important route, because artists are the entry, they're the gateway, and they can take something that would be perfectly fine and turn it into pure art. And I use that in a inevitably slightly pretentious sounding way, but it's art. It's not just the artwork inside my comic book. It is capital A art, and that's something that we should cherish. I go back to the bande dessinée culture. That's not news to a French reader. It's the ninth art. It's something to be studied, something to spend your 15 euros on, and then spend 3 months reading every night, because every panel is worth looking at for an hour or two. That's just not a culture that we have much over here. So, I'm not pretending I'm going to change that overnight, but I do think it's something we've got more space for than we currently allow.
I did want to ask about your collaborators overall, because you also have a Mischief of Magpies coming up, which is your distillery series that will be coming out at a point in time.
Yeah.
That you're doing with artist Matías Bergara, color assistant Kike J. Diaz, letter Hassan Otsman El Howe, Emma Price designing, and Eric Harburn editing. I cannot help but notice that I said 3 of those names twice.
I do like to work with the same people.
That's what I was going to get at is like, do you find that the strengths of a collaboration are enhanced by repetition?
Yes. And
that includes Matthias in there too, who obviously I've worked with a lot.
Strengths is a good word. I tend to use the word trust. When you work with the same people over and over, you trust them so implicitly that the nature of your work changes. When I write a script for Matthias, it looks very different from unknown artist the editor will pick on my next superhero book.
Right.
With the latter of those, I'm covering every base, describing things as well as I possibly can, so it all lands. With Matthias, I know that whatever I write, he'll make it better anyway, so I don't need to be too fussy about it. With Eric Harburn, the editor, we constantly joke about this, but he's the most infuriating fucker in the world, because he'll give me a note and it's always right. I'll spend 2 days whining and griping because it means I have to change things, and then eventually I'll calm down enough and realize that he's right. God damn it.
You worked with him on Damn Them All, right?
I did. He was at Boom. No longer at Boom. Now he's with Tiny Onion, which until quite recently was the sort of farmed out production wing that Distillery used.
He's the director of editorial.
Yes, exactly that. A wonderful, exceptionally clever, infuriating fucker. Hassan, one of the best letterers in the field, can do things with the illusion of sound that I don't think anybody else can do. Has the sort of joyous thrill of experimentation that I have. Recognizes that if you're going to pretend that sound is a graphic element, then why shouldn't you play with that? Why shouldn't that be a tool? Emma Price, designer, exceptional creator of logos, exceptional brain for creating design elements. Also turns out to be an extraordinary illustrator. She's done a few variant covers for The Voice Said Kill. And here I must declare my nepotism, because reader, I married her. That's my wife. that's why I work with her a lot. But yeah, Mischief of Magpies. It's the sort of unofficial. It's not even a sequel. It's nothing like Step by Bloody Step, but it is the sort of the next volley in the creative challenge that Matthias and I like to set ourselves. Step by Bloody Step from a few years back was the totally language-free comic fantasy that did very well for us. And Mischief of Magpies goes in completely the other direction. It takes the idea of a troubled young man, an adolescent really, who writes text diaries, and finds a way to blend the textual elements of his innermost thoughts with, it's essentially a portal drama. He keeps disappearing into an extraordinary fantasy world, and the way that the text and the visuals, both in sequential form and in illustrated form, flow through one another, is quite unique, and I think it works really well. Our challenge to ourselves came from the perspective of having read, you read Watchmen, there's all those sort of backing material sections, the interstitial stuff.
The pirates.
Yeah, and Hickman used to do it so well with the X-Men books, and I did it in Damn Them All, but we cannot deny that if you're a particular sort of reader, here you are rattling through your comic, you spent $5 on it and you really only want it to last you 2 minutes anyway, fuck you, reader. So you're going to be jumping over these text bits. That's annoying to me. It just feels like such a waste. So we wanted to...
People do that?
Yeah, all the time. Lots and lots of people.
Oh my God. I've never considered that.
All those data pages in the X world that took so goddamn long to make, all the deeply researched stuff in Damn Them All. You go back to Watchmen, there are plenty of people who never read the pirate stuff. There are plenty of people who never read the drawing blood from Athena's shoulder or whatever it was, the owl stuff. All of that, it just gets skipped because it's not what people came for. We wanted to try and find a way to square that circle, to make it feel like there is no distinction between the textual elements and the visual elements. The mind just flows across them all. It's very difficult to describe until you've seen it, but I think it works quite well. As you alluded, the problem is that the publisher, as a consequence of all sorts of stuff to do with the distribution model in comics and the collapse of diamond distributors and all sorts of new models of doing things, we're in a position where we don't exactly know when that is going to drop. We think sometime in 2026, and I look forward to updating everybody because I'd love to know myself. But I think it's going to be worth the wait.
I'd never heard the term. You said portal drama. I think that when it was announced on Polygon, I think they called it a portal fantasy. And then I saw people talking about it, and it was like a known phrase. I'd never heard that phrase before. I like it, but it was new to me.
Like, you go back to Chronicles of Narnia and...
Yeah.
It's something Kieran plays with in Die.
Yep.
It's any story in which usually a young person disappears into another world. It's a portal fantasy. I think we've subverted and done enough interesting stuff with it. There's a whacking great twist in the middle of A Mischief of Magpies that I love so much. It's going to make people either very angry or very happy. I don't know. But
maybe they'll be very happy because they got very angry. Sometimes people do that.
That's fine. That's a reaction. That's all we want from readers, is a reaction.
Yeah.
I think it's good stuff, and as anything drawn by Matías would be, it's eyeball-searingly beautiful.
Not to keep making this about France, but I feel like Step by Bloody Step probably did really well in France.
It really did. It really, really did, and to the extent that we co-published with Image, and I forget whether Olivier had already moved over. I think it was Delacourt at the time. In any case, the hilarious thing was, in order to demonstrate that it was a French edition rather than the American edition, we had to come up with these funny little poetic phrases at the beginning of each chapter just so they had something to translate.
Yeah.
So there are these cute little sort of poetic phrases that set the scene for each of the seasons we move through. It's a gorgeous big hardcover that you can get. Yeah, I mean, and it makes no difference if you want a hardcover copy of Step by Bloody Step. It's called Saison de Sang, Season of Blood.
I love it. Have you ever met Francois Arquette from Urban Comics?
No.
Great guy. You would absolutely love him. He's your type of comics people. And last year at San Diego Comic-Con, he brought me a big stack of the books that Urban Comics, they're a French publisher, and they primarily do DC, but they also do a bunch of Image books, and they do a bunch of like Boom books and et cetera, et cetera. Like they do all James Tynion stuff. Oh my God. Like the oversized, gorgeous hardcovers. I'm just like, if it wasn't for the fact that I literally could not read it, it would be my ideal form of how to read comics. But last question for you about this. I do want to talk about Matías just because your books together feel like you've done technically 3 different books. You did the first Coda, you did Step by Bloody Step, or I could be missing one, and then you did the next follow-up on Coda. Then you have A Mischief of Magpies coming up.
He did some issues of The Dreaming, and he did some issues of Hellblazer.
Okay, there we go. Is part of your creative process of working with Matthias just seeing how far you can push each other? Because it kind of feels like that. It's not that like you're focused purely on formalism or anything like that. Like, I don't think that's why you did Step by Bloody Step like you did, maybe. But do you find that he's the type of collaborator that pushes you and you can push him in really interesting ways?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it helps. It helps that I know what he loves. I mean, he makes no secret of this. If money were no object, we would just make Coda forever. That's all he wants to do is draw the characters from Coda and the things in Coda and explore that world. He wants to draw completely limitless fantasy. So doing things like A Mischief of Magpies, the challenge for him is that there are sequences in it which are set in the real world, which is like, no, I don't want to draw cars. I don't want to draw houses. I don't want to draw sinks. Well, he has to do some of that in this, but just a little bit before we disappear into this incredible fantasy scape. For me, it's more about the challenge for me is not so much to find things to push him, but we're back to what we talked about before, the, noscete ipsum, recognizing that if I'm not careful, I will overwrite. So the challenge is to say, here is a thing that I'm just going to take my hands off it and pass it to him, and it'll be better for it. And that's quite a hard fought and long struggle to get to the point where I'm able to say, sometimes doing less is better.
Yeah.
If you've got the right collaborator.
I like that you brought that phrase up because it was going to be where I end this podcast. We talked a lot about knowing thyself, knowing who you are as a creator. You've went through a lot of things lately. You've went through a lot of learning more about yourself. Obviously, you've alluded to some of the stuff you have coming up. You could be big you already are big in France, but you could be even bigger in France soon enough. But do you have a sense as to what an ideal mix looks like for you at this point? Like, have you formalized a vision that really defines what you want? Or are you still kind of searching for that based off of what kind of presents itself to you?
Excellent question. Don't have an answer. Eternal journey. The answer would be different on any given year. What is right for me now is not what was right for me last year. There are books that are easier to write. Funnily enough, Step by Bloody Step was the easiest book I've ever written, and not just because it had no dialogue, but just because it just flowed, blah, 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 like a evisceration, my guts falling out of me. Damn Them All was like pissing razor blades. It was every issue took me sometimes 3 weeks to write, and yet I still think that's some of my best work. So what is right for me because it's effortless is not necessarily what's right for me because it's the best work I could do. So I suppose the journey in that sense is going easy on myself, but recognizing I also need to challenge myself and finding the right balance between those things. The problem, I suppose, is that it's impossible not to sound pompous when you talk about these things. I keep hearing my voice and thinking, I'm talking about fucking comics, and here I am talking about the inner truth and verisimilitude and all of this stuff, having come off a run about a man who runs very fast. You sort of have to go right back to the very beginning, the conversation we were having, I think before we even started recording. I think it's so important to find a way to both be very proud of what you're doing as a creator, but also to not ever be in danger of taking it too seriously. You sort of have to be able to laugh at it. You have to be able to say, you know what? This might not be my best work, but somebody somewhere seems to like it, and that's enough. And to occasionally be silly. I quite like silliness. I think we sort of mistake seriousness for sophistication, and that needn't be the case. Yeah, I have no good answer to your question other than that it evolves. It keeps changing, and the best you can do, the best any of us can do, is make the decision that feels right right now and leave ourselves a back door so that we can change our minds later, or at least be able to explain. I have no problem with people fucking up. The problem I have is when people don't accept that they fucked up, when they don't say, you know what, I made the wrong decision, but I at least thought about it. Every time in my career I've been accused of getting something wrong, and there's always, we live in a world of social media, there's always going to be somebody who feels like you made a bad faith decision, you've offended somebody. I hate it. I hate being mistaken for somebody who has ugly views or somebody who thinks the wrong things. But what is so much worse is when somebody thinks you didn't think about it. Somebody accuses you of having made a stupid, thoughtless decision in your art. And I never want that to be true. I always want to be able to say, I did think about it. And listen, if I got it wrong, that's clumsy. That's poor decision-making on my part. That's a lack of research, a lack of understanding, and a lack of empathy. But I thought about it. I wasn't ever being stupid about it. And I think that's probably the best I can hope for. I don't know if that resonates for anybody else, but that's my own personal metric for making sure I'm staying honest.
I mean, I think that's the best anybody can hope for these days. But Si, I think you're doing a great job, but that is all I have for you. Thank you so much for coming on to talk about A Voice Said Kill, Mischief of Magpies, The Flash, and everything else. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you. And thank you. You said to me, do you know what? I remember this very clearly. At the end of my last interview with you, during which I had spent an hour and a half being a little bit of a burnt out sad sack, you said to me something like, you know what, Si, people don't say this often enough, but good job. So David, people don't say this to you often enough, but mate, good job.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Off Panel with writer Si Spurrier. You can find his work in The Flash at DC Comics and the upcoming The Voice Said Kill at Image Comics and A Mischief of Magpies at Distillery. Love Off Panel, want to support it? Subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts or Spotify today and give the show a rating or review while you're at it, but 5 stars only. You can also support the show by backing it on Patreon. Find the show at patreon.com/offpanel. And when you back it on there, you get early access to each week's podcast, as well as weekly content and more. Want even more? Subscribe to my subscription comic site Sketched at sketch.com for long-form articles, interviews, and the rest of the site's content. You can find Off Panel and Sketched on social media by following on Blue Sky and Instagram or following me on Blue Sky and Instagram. Big thanks to all my existing patrons, including Justin Pearson, Gianni Palumbo, Oliver Saba, P. Sanger, Wilson Garrett, Ben O'Grady, Mark Tweedell, Ben Allen, Zach Quaintance, Kazu Kibuishi, Claire Scott, Tyler Crook, Patrick Horvath, Louis Krupp, Raoul Allen, Omega Slice, John Walsh, Brandon Paul, Aaron Bussey, AC, Simon Birch, Austin, Sion, Megan Marsden, T.S. Luther, Comic Book Couples Counseling Podcast, Scott Carpenter, Gus, MK Fryguys, Saunter, Brian, Chris Robinson, David Byrne, Milton Lawson, Benjamin Wilkins, Chris Hacker, John Neesmith, John Auerbach, Dustin Weaver, Brandon Heyman, Aiden Hammond, Faith Aaron Hicks, Ben Rowe, Cameron Brown, Jonathan Breen, Charlie Stickney, Tom Drennan, Jeremy Thomas Burke, Jared Schwab, Scott Dunn, Chip Mosher, Seth Pomeroy, James McEwen, Andrew Lehman, Christina Merkler, Scott Place, Travis Gibb, Darcy Van Polgees, Tom Evans, Reed Beeman, Kelly Sudaconic, Max Wood, Jeremy Lambert, Brian Near Levy, Jason Hussa, Kieran Gillen, Jonathan Kent Uratam, Henry Johnson, Dennis Hoffman, Django Boren of Comic Shop Assistant, James Tynan IV, Chris Langford, Jason Wood, Tom Peachy, Ben Domstead, Rom V, Nick Walker, Patrick Coyle, Isaac Oren, Klaus Vandeven, Subend Industries, Jack Mulqueen, Carl Kerschel, Robert Masella, Elza Chartier, Luke Nakashoji, Dr. Luke, Scott Hazelwood, Canadian by Proxy, Bradley Rader, Carl Troy, Brandon Pills, Patrick Brower, Declan Shabby, Dan Garino, Adam Freeman, Ben Wild, Brian Klein Q, Liana Kangas, Nick Bennett, Susanna Pola, Reed Hinkley Barnes, Mario Tiambang, Robert Wilson IV, Andrew Carita, Stephen Hall, Philip Myra, Chris Pacella, Torrin Grunbeck, Fuzz Bubbles, Christopher Todd, Transmitter Down, Waltz Comics and Books, Akil Wilson, Alex Dimitriopoulos, Terry Dodson, Wesley Giff, Sean Kirkham, Julio Anta, Brett A. Schmidt, Jason Goodmanson, Paul Reinwand, Vita Ayala, Akil, Philip Seavey, Al Ewing, David Kelly, Jason Nass, Adam Bogert, Matthew Taylor, Nick Patera, Jacob Sorelli, Ford Gilmore, David Baraldi, Nick Hull, Bjorn Basin, John Hendrick, Ian Maxfield, Cliff Chang, Colin McMahon, Adam Highfield, Fiona Staples, Mark Abnett, Michael Shirley, Tom Barnett, Jim Demonakos, Norbert, Nick Lowe, James Kaplan, and Mission Comics and Art in San Francisco. You guys are all the best. A quick thanks to Wolfpack for letting me use their song Outro as the show's opening theme, and to Upright T-Rex Music, who wrote and performed Off Panel's outro and ad music just for the show. Check out their music on Spotify because it's completely delightful. Thanks for listening, and tune in next week for another episode.